If you're looking to grow plants in pots, choosing the right potting mix is really quite important. Now there's hundreds of different types of potting mix on the market, and sometimes it's a little bit hard to know what's going to produce a result that looks like this. There are a few simple tricks, and the first of those is to realise that there is an Australian standard for potting mix. It's been written and it's been around since 1989 or so. So if you look for a bag with the Australian standard marks on it, you can see the ticks on the bag, and that will give you an indication that the mix at least conforms to the Australian standard. But I think you can do better than that. If you look and try at some of these bags, you'll see some absolute rubbish. Now this mix is a mix that I bought for about $3.99 or thereabouts. And as you can see, it looks exactly like mulch because that's essentially what it is. If you look carefully at the components of this particular mix, you can see lots of pieces that are like that and lots of very thin straw type pieces which begin to break down as soon as you put them into a pot and will decompose, and therefore the whole mix will slump. So I reckon that if you use a cheap mix like this, that about 2 months or so after you've potted a plant up, it'll only have about half the volume of mix. So that's going to be a terrible mix, and you'll never produce decent plants. Certainly won't produce decent vegetable plants in a mix that's like this. This is a mix that's about halfway between the two, and as you can see, it looks entirely different. But once again, you can see that it's full of compost, and it's also full of sawdust. And once again, this will slump and will reduce the amount of air that's in the mix by a great deal, because air is really very critical to growing plants in containers well. So those two mixes I would regard as being mixes that are very much short term and probably much better off to be used as mulch or compost in the garden. Commercial nursery people use a mix that's very much more like this, and if you look very closely at this mix, you can see a mix of components sizes, and you can see pieces of bark that are quite solid and around about 1 centimetre or so in diameter. And those pieces of bark function to keep the mix apart and to keep the air into it so that the plants will continue to grow for a while. And I would think a mix like this would have a life in a pot for perhaps 4 or 5 years is much more what you're after. The other thing that you can see about this particular mix is that it does contain some fertiliser. That's the little green piece you can see in here. These little pieces of fertiliser will probably last for a month or two, and after that time you'll have to add some other form of controlled release fertiliser to keep the pot going. Now if you are a specialist grower of things like orchids or azaleas, choosing the specialist mixes will certainly work. But for a standard gardener looking for a decent quality potting mix, I'd strongly recommend using one of the more expensive mixes that conforms to the Australian standard, and certainly one which has these more chunks, not much in the way of straw and not much in the way of compost. And if you do that, I reckon you'll actually save money in the long term, because this potting mix will last for 4 or 5 years.